You can also type in chat to maybe fill this pause a bit. Друзья, получилось ли у вас включить субтитры? Напишите, у кого не получилось, может быть, мы сообразим. Или все получилось?
I think I will go from here, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Is it maybe no? I'm sorry. One more minute. Okay. And yes, here we're going to the first brief that I had developed from the concept of my dissertation. The concept of my dissertation in Bartlett was architecture and metamorphosis, and I was always interested in how, in like studying these transitions of states that happen in materials, in geometries. For example, what the transition from like a cube to the sphere is like a super simple example. But then when AI appeared, like I was really interested to study like different materials, and I created this online workshop where we would study enormous amount of different materials, how different phenomena change, and what kind of architectural conditions we could explore through that. So these are like just different images from those workshops. These were like really also, maybe they happened starting from 2022 actually. And these are like different ideas based on melting glass, molten lava, fluorite crystallization, shimmering Northern lines, butterfly wind transformation. I really enjoyed actually doing that workshop because every student would choose something for themselves and would explore specifically that architectural language, which was really interesting for the student. And but the concept behind it was actually I tried to like open up the palette which we would use just super abstractly. We would take 4 states of matter as a palette, like starting from plasma, gas to fluids to solids. So we are not bounded with anything, and students would explore any phenomena they would be interested in, like starting from flames to interstellar gas, to helium, to ozone, to oil, to synthetic liquids, to wood, skin. So people would find that they're like tectonic and material conditions that they would translate into architecture. And you know what was really interesting, that all the states and all the different projects, they would study also different conditions. For example, for like plasma, you would study brightness and distribution of the volume. Then for the gas, you would study directionality of different pieces, how they fly, for example. For fluids, you would study transparency, reflectivity, and for solid, you would study composition, density, porosity, everything that we usually do with like architectural solid things. So and the process was based on like 4 different steps. First, the student would need to analyze a transformation process, find like specific steps in the transformation process, and name those. For example, how the water transforms from gas to ice, for example. And the student would need to analyze these 4 steps. And then the steps in between, we would try to blend them with the different typologies, like a room, public building, facade, anything, which would have really specific scale to it and really specific granularity. And changing the granularity would also be interesting to explore, because you have this one like change of material, and then you apply it to different topologies, which already change the scale, and you would explore the material in different ways. Then you curate the program around selected spatial conditions, and eventually you develop like more general transitions between these different states. I will show one example from that workshop, which was probably like really most representative. It's a Plastic Life Celebration Center. So the Alexander explored plastic waste and the transformation process from heating to mixing, and he explored density, thickness, and scale of elements. So, for example, this condition is about like super elements that are like plastic that is crumbling apart, and then he would apply it to some sort of facades, then something more like stitchy elements of plastics, and it would create different like infrastructures. Then this roof typology made of really like thin and soft pieces of plastic, and eventually some kind of plastic which already you cannot really understand what is this in this like soup of things. And they were all trying to also say something about the space, and the space was gradually somehow like connected, all the different spaces. So then the second brief I wanted to talk about is the workshop I did with Ricardo de Hostos in Architecture Association. So just here, this slide for the title. So the industry is usually talking about how environmental change becomes like a driver for creating the architecture and how it can change the collective life. So here I changed a little bit the brief to adapt it to the idea of change in the environment, and we would study urban fabrics and different natural contexts, mostly forests. So there were also 4 steps: observing natural typology through materiality and structure, which, for example, observing a forest. Then curating some really specific references, because the studio is also based on the studio is really mixed media, and they would use lots of drawings and lots of modeling. So we thought that combining this transformation of natural context and with their references and with their style would be super interesting to explore. And then 2 other steps is again similar to the first brief, generating spatial conditions through these topological intersections that each student would have, and translate this whole thing to tectonic, atmospheric, and material qualities. And these are some of the examples. As you can see, they're all about also some kind of environmental change where kind of human infrastructure really intervenes the natural landscape. And I will show a couple of projects. This one is also super representative. It's by Joshua Hallam, and as you already can see, like this is the AI generation we did on the short workshop together, and this is the final model. They are like they have quite a lot of similarities, and Joshua really tried his best to translate different tectonics from the images to the model. And eventually this is the program is like biomechanical flood infrastructures, absorbing excess water and mitigating typhoon impacts through environmental sensing and adaptive storage. So there's like the whole program and development of the projects happened after me. And of course, the studio is really amazing in trying different medias, exploring those tectonics through different materials. And I think this actually sort of answers the question, like, how do you also deal with the with tectonics that come with images, then you test them through different medias, and then you try to like own your language through testing through different medias. some more images from the project. So this is actually the research the students did at the very beginning. They went to the forest and they studied different like transitional moments, as I asked them to do, perspectives, some sort of joins, and some like multi-scale transitions in textures. Then the student gathered all the different references he was interested in, and how the drawing which they were asked to do eventually in the studio would have, what kind of qualities it would have. And these are some of the generations. Students already started to work on their drawings, and what was really interesting, that the drawing texture kind of affected the architecture itself. The texture became some sort of quality as well. These are other generations, and well, it's mostly creating some sort of visions that helped students eventually develop the project. And I think, as Ricardo told me, that they would use AI throughout the whole year, all the tools that we studied together with them on the workshop. And as you can see, this is one of the first drawings the student did, and this really resembles all the generations, and helped the student to create his own language. And this small image is also trying to replicate the shape of it, the membranes, the scale, the proportions through hand as well. And then I think the successful moment here is that it's not only the transitions from AI to modeling, but also from AI to sketching, to lots of sketching, and then to modeling eventually, and then to structuring and making structure models. More resemblance from the images to the actual project. These are like drawings that also super resemble the images here. And three more projects from those workshops, just to also represent like how the concepts that students already grasped from the very beginning, they would appear eventually in the final projects. So this is the project by Ingdon Chen and A Mile Long March, the adaptive use of military ruins through cycles of construction, decay, material reuse. So like the whole idea of the project was not really developed when we had this workshop, but the context was there, and the general idea and the direction also was kind of around students' mind. And he started to develop these images, and eventually the idea of transformation came out in this drawing. Like for me, I really love this drawing because it shows like how structure is, how different structures interact together. And that's what we were trying to also do through images, studying iterations of combining different structures one by one. Another project, this is more about how like cork, how the bark influenced also the landscapes. And it's the meaning even not so important for me here, but more how the bark actually inspires the density and the composition of different spaces and the landscape itself. So learning the bark and all its like densities and structures, and then trying to replicate it through your drawing helps a lot to actually think about the diversity of spaces. And the last project, more to illustrate that it's not only about translating directly the aesthetics of the images to the final result, but also testing the ideas. Like first of all, for example, this is about integrating trees into architectural models, and then eventually the project didn't end in this specific aesthetics, but it still kept some of the structural ideas. And it's all, I think, for me, taking part in this workshop and also participating in the process together with the intermediate 3 was super helpful in terms of seeing like how aesthetics can be used just as a accelerator of a thought and accelerator of different stages of the design. So yes, this is my introduction to my own experience in integrating AI in architecture. And yes, I will give the word to Tucker next. Thank you so much.
Amazing. So cool to see all that. All right, let me get started.
Alisa, we have one question from Jorian. Maybe we can answer them now and then go to Tucker.
I think we'd rather go through presentations.
Oh, okay, fine.
So first and foremost, thank you so much for everybody for having me. I'm extremely excited to be here. I think I was telling everybody in the conference earlier that I think it's a really important discussion to be having. And I'm constantly struck at how little discourse or how little innovation is happening, specifically as it pertains to machine learning and AI in architectural education. That's not necessarily something new. That always happens within the field of architecture. We tend to always be a decade behind everybody else. But I think this conference is very important for us to have these discussions. So thank you. So I'll start presenting my work. I'm going to start with just a sort of brief abstract to understand where I position myself amongst the discourse of AI. And then I'll walk through some of the student work that I've been working with students at UCLA the last couple of years in the Masters of Science postgraduate program. And then, yeah, I'm excited to hear the discussions that ensue from there. So for years, my work has circled something I call querying, not entirely identity, but process, the way systems and things become other than themselves. A river meanders, a species mutates, a city hybridizes, a building forgets what it was for. Novelty rarely arrives clean. It arrives through contamination, through collision, through encounters that weren't planned for, which is why I've grown suspicious of a distinction most people accept without question: natural intelligence versus artificial intelligence. Natural against what exactly? The first cells on planet didn't receive instructions. They engineered themselves through error, through accident, through slow accumulation of useful mistakes. Plants didn't simply adapt to land. Their emergence transformed land itself. Forests didn't respond to atmosphere. They became part of the process that remade it into something that could hold us. Cities are memory that moved outside the skull. Language is thought made storable, transmissible, losable. Every tool we've ever reached for has been a way of thinking we couldn't do alone. Intelligence has never been self-contained. It has always leaked outward, into stone, into symbol, into infrastructure. Maybe it was always artificial. Maybe that was never the problem. When early plants evolved rigid cellular structures, the ability to stand upright on land, they didn't just evolve a biological problem. They broke the world open. Organic matter began accumulating faster than anything could consume it. Entire landscapes buried themselves in material for which no digestive system yet existed. The decomposers came later, millions of years later. What they couldn't reach was compressed over millennia into what we nowadays call coal. One small structural innovation, entirely new ecological, geological, and evolutionary realities cascading outward from it, unplanned, uncontrolled, irreversible. I think we may be inside a similar moment, not because machines are becoming human. That frankly bores me. It assumes the human assumes that the human is the destination, the standard everything else gets measured against. What interests me is the substrate instead. Writing is a substrate, so was print, photography, computation. Each one didn't just store thought, it reorganized thought, made certain kinds of thinking possible, let others quietly die. AI is another such shift, not an answer to the question of intelligence, but a new medium through which intelligence moves. And in moving, changes shape. The question isn't whether it thinks, the question is what becomes when it flows here. If intelligence were simply optimization, every river would be a straight line. But intelligence often appears through detours, through redundancies, through mutations, through deviations from an efficient path. Evolution rarely takes the shortest route. Cities rarely grow according to plan. Ecologies become resilient precisely because they contain more possibilities than any one system can predict. The history of architecture is often told as a history of invention. Increasingly, I think it may be a history of recombination, not the creation of something from nothing, but a continual rearrangement of what already exists into configurations that were previously unimaginable. The question is why I'm interested in AI as a teacher, as not as a technologist. Education has always been described as knowledge transfer, but transfer is the wrong word, and I think we've always known it. Knowledge doesn't move intact from one mind to another. It mutates, it drifts, it combines with everything already living in there. Students don't receive ideas, they metabolize them. What comes out the other side is never quite what went in. The classroom is already an ecology. Intelligence in the instructor, yes, but also in the students, in drawings and models and software and the buildings we study and the disciplinary histories embedded in how we learn to see. Learning doesn't happen in any one of these things. It happens in the friction between them. AI doesn't replace that ecology, it enters it. And like every new participant, every new student, every new paradigm shift, every tool that changed how drawings get made, it changes the system just by being there. So the question I'm interested in is whether students should use AI. The debate has the same problem as the neural versus artificial one. It assumes a baseline that was never stable to begin with. The question that actually interests me is what kinds of thinking becomes possible when they do. This has changed how I think about teaching architecture. For most of the last century, architectural education has largely been organized around the production of objects, buildings, drawings, images, final projects. Increasingly, I'm interested in teaching students how to construct systems or thought rather than pure objects, how to build data sets rather than collections, how to design workflows rather than single outcomes, how to develop design engines rather than final forms. Because if intelligence is distributed rather than contained, then authorship becomes less about producing a singular answer and more about cultivating the conditions from which answers emerge. In that sense, AI is not a shortcut. It's a new participant in a much larger ecology of design. So rather than asking whether AI belongs in the classroom, I've become more interested in treating it as a new ecological condition, one that, like every major technological shift before, demands new forms of literacy, new forms of judgment, and perhaps entirely new forms of creativity. The projects I'm about to show are less examples of students using AI, but I would say probably they're experiments in what design education could become when intelligence is understood as something distributed across people, tools, environments, histories, and increasingly the machines that surround us. So one of the first projects that I will show is a year-long research studio that happened from 2024 to 2025, in which we looked at Sea Ranch, a really amazing community in Northern California, who from its inception was a ecological test bed. Essentially, developers bought the land, and instead of doing what was typical at the time and cover the land in suburban sprawl, they tried to learn from the environment itself, try to learn from what Sea Ranch could offer them. It was also not just European settlers who came here before. There were indigenous peoples who took care of the landscape, who would do controlled burning, who would help control populations of animals. And when in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, when Sea Ranch was being developed, the question was, how do you enter into this ecology? How do you enter into it without destroying what's special about it? And so Sea Ranch developed this really unique design brochure, certain guidelines that actually most of California's regulation is based off of in many ways. The laws requiring all public beaches to be public in California was developed from Sea Ranch. And so it had a very important place in the architectural imagination of what it meant to be ecological, or what it meant to work with an environment as opposed to against it. They would create these diagrams to show shifts in how they understood their place in Sea Ranch. They created diagrams, architectural explorations, certain principles of, yes, you can do this, no, you can't do that. But underneath it all was this free spirit of not taking convention as is, always innovating, always playing, always trying to find something novel and new while respecting the environment, the conditions, the materiality that they were in. So we had students actually create master plans for Sea Ranch. They're encountering a variety of issues that they needed to account for. So students were looking at how to face increasing issues of fire danger, or of coastal erosion, or of gentrification due to desirability of the area. And normally that would take a very, very, very long time and a very big, robust team to be able to output proposals that would actually help solve some of the issues. But through using machine learning and specifically generative tools, we were able to much more quickly go through iterations and come up with novel ideas of how we could address the issues that Sea Ranch was experiencing. And so these are some of the examples that were produced throughout the year. This specific project looked at how to use local materials to create housing units that could fit into one another so that they could be multi-generational. If there was a new family that came to Sea Ranch right now, there's not enough housing to hold them. And furthermore, the current architecture doesn't allow for a certain type of change. It's very rigid. And so their project was about, how can you make an architecture that is fluid, that reacts to the environment, that also reacts to potential environmental conditions. Other projects looked at how to create courtyards or interior spaces that would be able to help mediate observation lines for fire danger, but also in a way to sort of create a sense of community. What's important, I think, is that we were able to arrive at these very novel designs that paid homage to Sea Ranch, and were specifically trying to tackle the really complicated design issues that they're experiencing, but creating something that was as novel as possible, something that wasn't just taking the Sea Ranch aesthetic as is and for granted, but rather trying to push on what we might assume that could be, or what it could manifest into. And as you can see, a lot of these images and videos that are being displayed were also being generated through machine learning and generative tools, and as such allowed us to much more quickly move through design process. Another studio I wanted to bring up was the one we just culminated. I taught alongside Yulia Corner at UCLA. This was a year-long program in which students were tasked with thinking primarily about material research, but we threw AI this year, threw AI into the mix this year to see what would happen. And I think what we found is that there is a really important field of research that has yet to really be explored, which has to do with the process of taking something from digital that is generative and zeros and ones, and turning that into something that is physical, something that you can touch and work with. And so this year was a really interesting task of using these tools, but really importantly, figuring out how to use these tools in translation into something that we can touch, into something we can feel. So the first quarter, students looked at lenses, specifically swimming goggles. And we started by looking at different natural systems. The student, Miriam Abdel, looked at the Valella, I believe is the name of the organism. And we pulled certain knowledge that we could from that natural system, and then used parametric tools to replicate those systems, but also used machine learning to create data sets that were inspiration for the aesthetics of what this could look like. And in many ways, that allowed us to reach a much more novel lens than if we were to just being focused solely on making it hyper efficient and hyper standardized. And so there's this really interesting give and pull where I think the natural tendency for people approaching 3D printing or approaching AI is that it is taking away agency, it is taking away labor in some way, but we tried to show through this class that instead it is the quite opposite. It allows us to reach a certain level of novelty that we wouldn't be able to otherwise. So I'll just quickly go through some more examples of the landscapes that the students were designing. Again, taking natural systems, trying to pull knowledge that they can from them, and then replicating that through parametric tools, and then figuring out how to take those ideas and bringing them into manifest form. What is also important is, I should say, I mean, we've spent a lot of time curating all of this work, which without the use of generative tools, it would be very difficult for us to get the quantity of work that you see. The majority of everything you see is actually physical and we actually made. However, with different generative tools and different workflows, we're able to actually put people in their scenes and actually make it feel a lot more supple, a lot more alive than what people might normally assume comes out of an AI project. The second quarter, they went and took those same exact systems that they learned and applied it at large scale. We were able to obtain a swivel printer, which has a meter by meter by meter print bed size. And so the students were tasked with taking those systems that they had developed and started articulating at a small scale, that of the lens, and blowing it up to the size of a performance pavilion. So students combined into groups of two. They would combine the different ideas that they had evolved through their natural systems research and start developing tectonics that were specifically responding to the materiality of the analog world. But it was interesting because we could really easily then go back into the digital, take what we had done in the physical and bring it back into the digital again and work it through another process of optimization of environmental performance. And that workflow, again, adds a certain level of happenstance of play into these projects that I think without becomes very difficult. If not, maybe not difficult, it becomes a little bit more cumbersome to arrive at something that maybe you and the student are pleased with. Whereas I think when we have these tools, it might be a little bit easier. One more project that I wanted to show is a project by Catherine Deal. This is, I think, 3 years old at this point. I'm actually starting from the most recent AI stuff to the oldest, which is fun. But in this class, students were tasked with picking a quality. That was it. They had to pick a quality, and as you can tell, her quality was writhing, which is very not what I was expecting when I created the class. But I loved it because it allowed her to explore a certain territory of design of aesthetics that she would never have been able to approach in a conventional studio. She was allowed to essentially build off of her skills of hand drawing, of digital modeling, and all of her amazing references, whether primarily being from Akira. But what was really amazing is you can see through this board is we tried to arc or document the different prompts that we were using to create these various outcomes. And those prompts were very powerful because she had this background, this interest in this world that prior to this class she hadn't necessarily been able to explore in full fruition. So we spent the entire quarter just building up a database, building up a dialogue, trying to find something that worked with the chosen quality, but was also something that was very different. And then we actually turned those into physical models. So we figured out how to turn them into physical prints, how to slice them, and then how to fabricate them so that they became one physical object. And again, that's the sort of workflow that I'm increasingly finding more interesting. Another example of a class very similar where students were picking qualities and trying to develop models that encapsulated those said qualities. These are the models that had come out of that class. These were massive models. They're like a meter by a meter by a meter. And the idea was that these models, though they might lack some architectural articulation that some people might be accustomed to, they're trying to open up new avenues and new paths for people to design and create novelty. I'll just go through quickly. This was a class that we recently just went through where students were learning how to use video software. And for this specific project, Borna looked at the very strange, complicated high fashion industry and how to develop a narrative to talk about that fashion industry. So there's a company that owns every single specific type of an alpaca that exists in the world, and they have a monopoly on them. And so he developed a project sort of talking about this in narrative form of if you were to take that kind of odd, strange example that only exists in modern times because of the hyper-capitalist society we live in, what that would sort of look like if it plays out at an architectural scale. I believe that is my last project. So thank you so much for going along for the ride and looking at all of that. I hope it was kind of fun. We're going to do questions at the end, so I will hold off any comments that I have. But with that, Alberto, take it away.
Maybe can I just have one question so we don't go too far from it? For the second project where you had this 3D prints, how did you actually study those biological systems? Did you also analyze it through AI?
It was kind of hard to make the students not research using AI with these systems. We actually had them get the physical prototypes of whatever system they were looking at so that we could study it under a micro lens and try to study any sign of compression, tension, whatever, architectural things that we could pull out of the natural systems. But to be frank, a lot of their research came from just, chat engines that they're talking with and trying to build up a knowledge base that before this studio, when we didn't have these tools, it would have taken us much longer. But with these tools, it took much less time and their insights were far more novel. And I think we were able to pull a lot more knowledge from those systems than we would have been able to otherwise. So yeah, absolutely.
And yes, thank you. And the knowledge is like text-based knowledge, you mean, that you collected all the texts?
Could be, or just even using these tools as research tools. I mean, their ability to choose a precedent that actually fits maybe what they're looking to do is aided much more by using any sort of research tool as opposed to just trying to go on Google for 5 days trying to find something novel. So most definitely helped them reach a place where they were developing unique ideas and not just sort of copying stuff that they had seen on Google, for instance.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Alberta, you can continue.
Okay, let's try to continue here. Well, firstly, let me try to share my screen. Share, let's see if it's going well. Tell me if we can see this in a proper way. Can you see it? Can you see the presentation? Yeah.
Not yet.
Oh, so yes, as a classic something. Just give me a second again. Stop share. Just classic of share one again. I'm going to just share. It's really off. Give me a second. I'm going to press play, and then I'm going to just to do it. So if I'm pressing play here, it should be working now. Okay, share keynote. Yeah, this one. Now you can see. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, it's a classic. Yes. Let me just move this thing from Zoom here. Maybe just to the other side. I'm going to, yeah, much better than having a different screen. So well, yes, that's working well. Yeah, well, thank you very much for the invitation first. Well, as brief introduction, what we are actually doing and who we are, who I am also. I'm Alberto Fernandez. I'm an architect from University of Chile, Master of Architecture from the Bullet School of Architecture, in where actually I'm finishing my PhD. And actually I'm a lecturer here at in the Master of Performance and Interaction in Architecture, working together with Jessica In and Camille Dunlop, and also from from the University of Chile, Camilo Guerrero is also cooperating with this research agenda, in where we're actually developing this idea of natural artificial approach from micro to architecture. So basically, we are trying to navigate throughout the different scales using AI as a tool or methodology to understand what's going on between this translation process. Just here. So this research based and also is part of what we are actually doing here at my design studio together with the other academics here is based on the development of these natural artificial microarchitectures through the convergence of digitally interactive design, artificial intelligence, and specifically with diffusion models and biological-based natural structures, establishing in a way a hybrid framework that operates between the analog and also the computational system. So it's a kind of a hybrid approach. So we are actually also positioned in the paradigm of AI-driven hybrid ecologies. So in a way, we are investigating how simple rules are actually also generating complex spatial organizations that are actually not merely imitating natural morphogenesis, but actually participating in the continuous exchange between the natural and the artificial logics. Yeah. So actually, also we are exploring the transition into a high-resolution design to fabrication workflows, and also in this way we are framing architecture as an evolving system where actually emerge from encode behaviors rather than just externally exposed systems. So in that sense, firstly, we also kind of a brief introduction. I have this question about architecture as a mediator between nature or natural and artificial systems. So before AI, we were working with geometries that are in one way or another just based on these continuous geometries that are actually integrating different ecologies, or actually other shapes that are actually playing or dealing with the cell systems that are replicated or aggregated in horizontal, vertical, or dynamic ways, dealing with wind flows, or also getting or taking space with different arrangements, as we can see here. So, but also in parallel, this idea of aggregations are trying to understand how the natural growing systems are actually evolving as a natural artificial process. In the very end, we started to understand that the idea of just purely or merely using aggregations or architectures based on coding only are not necessarily the end of the process. So in this sense, we are actually hybridizing the idea of the use of code plus now AI in the process as a mediator between nature and artificial systems. And we are asking us also if these results are hybrid ecologies, and also if are they emerging spatial languages, and is in the end if there is finally a human-machine environment co-agency as a natural artificial manifestation. So we have with the students, we are actually just working with this idea of theoretical background in where we are understanding digital design processes into the age of artificial intelligence. Architecture faces as actually is facing this kind of paradigm shift from simulation to cognition. So basically, the architectural design workflow needs to learn. So versus the whole idea of a top-down design process. So also in parallel, we are actually understanding the idea of the acceleration of ecological collapse. And also I'm trying to understand this profound redefinition of nature, not longer understood as something external to human action. In this case, nature emerges as a co-produced, entitled, and increasingly computational field shaped by technological intervention as much as biological processes. So in our theoretical background, we are usually revisiting cybernetics from the idea of Gordon Pask, Sterling Price, and others, understanding this idea of continuous interaction between user, components, and environment, and also the idea of responsive environments with Nicolas Negroponte, redefining architecture as a responsive system, actually understanding architecture as a dynamic ecology in where humans, machines, materials, and AI can co-evolve in an intelligent way. Actually, we are understanding on how the self-organizing systems are actually working in terms of we are using cellular automatas and also other similar systems. And yeah, also we are revisiting this theory of post-natural design. Just try to understand actually if this architectural manifestation belongs to this approach of interconnected and co-evolving systems. So then basically we are actually working with this idea of co-evolving through feedback, data exchange, and material transformation. So architecture in this sense becomes a mediator of ecological intelligence, an active interface through which environment, computational, and material processes are actually negotiated. So our methodology basically is just jumping or actually navigating throughout the idea of data correction, code generation, AI diffusion enhancements, fabrication, and interactive feedback. And then I'm going to just present the projects that we are actually developing here. This is a kind of, this material is belonging from the last terms, and it's still ongoing. So this we have this case study A, architecture. So here the studies are working with the concept of estimergy, swarm intelligence, digital pheromones, collective spatial organization, and also with this key contribution about architecture emerging from collective behavior. So they are creating an aggregative process that is working as a host for ant colonies that are actually teaching us in a way how the ants are building his or their own home. So they are actually scanning and training the data set based on human creations, actually with the ant creation, and then a virtual experience based on this workflow. So they are actually understanding or how the colors are actually affecting the ant behavior and how the ants actually building things. So also there is an approaching where we are scanning the ant colonies growing processes, and then from there we are actually working with the idea of virtual space generation throughout digital transmutation. Then there is a processing of AI training with the experimental trials, in where basically the data set coming from the ant colony scanning plus the human patterns and actually also the colors that are actually emerging from that, is actually creating a synthetic outcome based on this hybridization between these processes. So they have also this idea of the hive network, so trying to understand that these designs are belonging to a bigger network of possible options to be done during the construction process. Actually, also the humans are creating, as I mentioned before, this color tracking throughout the yellow path tracking systems. So from there, actually, we're working with prototypes and understanding how each cell actually contains a feeding process, actually a growing construction system inside with materials. The digital transmutation process actually is working with this idea of color transformation and translation from the human movements into the ant colonies' color patterns. So in the end, they were designing in this first stage this idea of installation structure being fed with these colors coming from the human interaction, affecting the ant colony growing process. With using this system and this setting, basically they were actually feeding the ants with the human color patterns. So the second one is based on crystallization processes, in where they were exploring the idea of material growth, nucleation, environmental condition, crystal data set, and also AI translations, with this key contribution about architectural growth rather than design. So they were actually understanding how the crystals are actually growing. They were actually scanning and creating several samples from where they were just capturing data. They were actually understanding how the growing process emerged in this aggregated workflow, and they were comparing different samples, understanding different ways of actually growing. And then in the end, they were training data with these data sets, with all these images in high resolution, producing finally outcomes that are automatically transforming human bodies into, or actually human related geometries into crystal growing geometries. And then now they are actually designing an interactive process in where different screens are producing these crystal growing geometries that in a second stage now are actually transforming those geometries into human outcomes that are actually creating a collaborative aggregative process based on crystal growing simulations. So different examples about this ongoing process and actually how the real geometry and actually has been transformed into these crystal hybrid simulations. The third example is this idea of artificial life cycles, birth, evolution, decay, interactive creatures, and material fossilization based on this project that is actually exploring architectural spaces as living system. So they were understanding what is actually going on with our environment, and they were actually understanding, or they were simulating artificial pond in where 4 different creatures that are actually AI generated are actually inhabiting this space, colonizing them, and creating different relationships with the design process coming from an interactive device that actually creates are actually creating this species that are in a way colonizing this artificial point. And then the artificial point actually also understands the idea of bigger ecology and also the understanding the relationship between each species on a way of artificial life simulation process. Then the last one is based on this idea of growing space with conjugate formal life translation into a tangible CA-based ecological interface with a key contribution of architecture as ecological intelligence. So they were understanding a geometry that actually is working as an aggregative system, as a dynamic game that is actually based on the idea of evolution of genetic design from 2D cellular automaton to 3D, understanding actually the early prototypes coming from the 1970s, again with Gordon Paxton and Price, also John Fraser with the idea of the universal constructor from the 90s, and then also understanding the idea of cellular automaton evolution. They were creating a truncated octahedron space that actually is allowing us to just to simulate three-dimensional ecology that actually interprets materials like fire or oil, water, and electricity. And throughout this simulation, basically, they are actually creating a modular board structure that in the very end is transforming these arrangements into a three-dimensional prompt that throughout an AI training process is actually generating images and patterns that are in a way showing what actually is actually happening with the three-dimensional ecology that has been designed throughout this aggregative process, just using these octahedrons as a game. So there are different ideas about how to just create a feedback over this, let's say, game board, and using the AI as a projection. And in the end, the process is suffering several iterations, and actually is actually developing a super interesting way of creating three-dimensional prompts that you are actually aggregating a combination of one material with another one above and beside, and together in the end are actually developing a multi-layer interaction device based on AI from geometries to prompts, and then from prompts to image, and then finally from image to to video generation that actually is part of the design workflow. So as a conclusion, we are actually working with this idea from discrete projects to unitary systems that are actually working with these 4 approaches from collective, material, life cycle, and rule-based explorations, all being empowered by, with the use of AI in different ways. So role-based systems is intelligence is one of the things that we were learning. The collective intelligence approach also is something that has been emerging from these projects. The material intelligence also is something that has been part of the workflow during the last terms. And actually the idea of life cycle intelligence is something that has been emerging throughout this process. So, well, this approach, in a way, we are trying to understand that is redefining the architect's roles from form maker to curator, and actually of behaviors and interactions. So not just collecting images, actually we are understanding that the AI data is going just beyond just image generation, is based on behaviors and actually interactive data. So in the end, that is what we are actually doing now. And well, thank you very much for this time.
Thank you, Alberto. It was really intense, the presentation. I also probably wanted to ask you a question. So there's like a lot of this transition in the workflow between between data gathering, generating, curating, and can you talk a little bit about students? Like, what is the most difficult process for them? Also, maybe what is the most interesting project they perceived? Like a little bit about students would be interesting.
I should say something that is really fascinating, because usually when they are actually starting with the studio, they really don't know from where AI is actually coming. They truly think that this is something really new, but throughout the teaching process, also with the thesis part, are actually also leading. They are understanding that this is coming from from decades ago. They are actually learning from the past, in a way is affecting what they're actually doing now. So, and then one of the difficult parts is just trying to understand how to select data and how to curate data, and finally how to use this data in a training process. It's something that they are still working on that. But in the end, when they are understanding that AI is not just a result, it's just part of something else, because they are using AI for generating other things, usually geometries, arrangements, or actually aggregating process or printing processes. That is something also fascinating for, I think, from my perspective as an educator, because it's not just merely a result. AI is part of a bigger workflow, and that's something that I truly want to just highlight.
Oh, thank you. Tucker, if you also have any thoughts or questions, I think we're just opening this discussion. And
absolutely. I think what's really great about seeing both of your presentations is that there is a level of agency that we're getting back. One of the funniest things, one of the studios from 2 years ago that happened was I was teaching with Jeffrey Inaba, who was one of the first at Columbia to actually use the computer, at Harvard to actually use the computer in a studio project. And we were working in studio, and all of a sudden it was quicker for the students to hand sketch ideas and then feed it through generative tools than otherwise. And he was like, oh my gosh, this is now coming back. Like, these skills that we used to think were not helpful or died are like sort of coming back in a very interesting way. At the same time, there are far more mediums being accessible to students, whether that be video, image generation, that I think you can see in the breadth of your work, that allows for a much more I don't know, it's the difference between me starting to play football when I'm 10 and Ronaldo. Like there's just a certain level of skill sets and foundations that they're able to build much quicker using these tools while at the same time finding much more novel ways to approach them as opposed to what I've seen before. So in both of your examples, I think that was something that very much stood out to me. Maybe a question that I have for both of you is, I think in all of our presentations, we flirted a little bit with this idea of the natural or pulling ideas from natural systems. And that might seem counterintuitive when we're using with machine intelligence. I'm just wondering what that sort of friction provides. What does that enable you to do in your studios that were you to start with an ambiguous precedent or a system that doesn't have a knowledge base that you can pull from? What does that allow you to do with the students?
Lisa or me, just it's up to you.
If you want to go.
Well, no, I'm just wondering about this. What actually the question is just triggering to me. Let's say if in a way when they are or when we started the studio at the beginning of this year, we introduced the idea of the friction between nature and the artificial at the very beginning, but they were. It was mandatory to them to just to understand what this friction actually means. We were not actually forced giving them an assignment to do that. They were just literally really free to search to understand what means nature in one hand, what is artificial, and in which part of this misconnection is possible to create bridges. And I think throughout that process, then later, these projects were actually emerging because we were not forcing them with these predefined topics. They were searching, understanding, researching again. Actually, it was really enriching for them, this idea of understanding from where AI is actually coming, from where artificial life is coming, and including the winter of technology in the 80s, so it's a different story. and then finally, I think it's all about the friction. I'm trying to give them the chance to just to find the points in where this distance between nature and artificial is really close or really close to zero.
Yeah, I think for me, probably that's what I would like thinking about what is the like natural system that you could extract some sort of ideas, and then the I would not for my case I would not like talk about artificial systems, but more about like the noise that doesn't have any meaning or any knowledge, as you told, behind it. So I would like put two points on the list. Like here we have a natural system that has its own like logics that we could extract a little bit, and then there's this noise where there's nothing behind it. We would only need to create and overlap or like overimpose our meaning on top of it. So for me, it would be just because we're doing this as an exercise for students that they have to learn something from like data gathering and analyzing data. Like natural systems work in that way because we are analyzing it and getting something. But then if we take the noise as it is, there's like nothing to analyze. But I was then also curious about that actually for your work, Tucker, that there's like a lot of ambiguity in that work. And I would even think that we would start not from analyzing biological systems, but more from actually creating some sort of real ambiguous images and like pushing to the maximum level of ambiguity. But then what we would extract from there, what kind of systems they would actually show. Is it the systems of the generation machine, like that, how it creates images, or what kind of logics that we can actually extract from there? Maybe we find some sort of reason to do that as well. So that was for me just a little bit far from my understanding, but I think it's also interesting to explore what kind of logics is there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I also, we have these questions, the list of questions that I've prepared, and maybe we would just start also talking about them. If you guys have also any questions that appear like along the talk, let's just have it free-flowing, the discussion. So, I would start from the first question. Actually, maybe let me do this, the other one. I was thinking about what is your critiques for your own briefs at this point right now? Because do you think there are any gaps between translating data to analog, then to like all this process? That does it have any really like specific gaps that you're concerned about and you want to think about it more? Something that you are like really thinking about right now that bothers you in the brief that you already have right now?
It's a good question. Sometimes we are facing issues related with computer power based on just their machines. Just the sometimes even if I've been just teaching them about how to train data sets. At certain points of time, we need to rely on cloud-based services, which just are not precisely, I don't know. It's like I'm not really. I don't want to trust all the time in the cloud because sometimes you never know what's going to happen. So we were actually trying to work with the local power, but that also requires sometimes more time in terms of training, also in terms of using the computers in this way is actually in a way creating delays in other parts of the process. So it's something that has been just I think the most challenging part. Yeah, from my perspective, and also sometimes this is a kind of it's an error process. So when you are throughout this workflow, we just the training and something the data set is in the end it's not giving you a proper good result. So that you need to iterate again and let's wait for a couple of hours or a day or just that's kind of painful. And also when we are translating this 2D or information or data information into the 3D space because we need to fabricate, we need to just create physical models. That's also really challenging, and it's something that must be in a way improve, if you ask me, but it's something that we need to understand day by day which way is possible to be developed in a better way.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's such an interesting question. This gap between these new tools and architectural thinking. I think if you think historically, architectural education has more often than not focused on production. And I think what we're seeing is maybe a shift towards evaluation. What I mean by that is it's less of a question of can you produce an option? It's more of can you recognize a valuable one? Can you recognize something in the image that you can pull from that hopefully maybe nobody else can see, or not just image, whatever you're working with. But I think what I guess the way that I try to bridge that is I try to work with students to develop, I guess, a sense or a taste to be able to identify latent opportunities. And I don't think that's too different than what you were saying, Alyssa, is like how estranged can you get it to the point where something new or novel comes out the other end? If you're just working with the same, you might not necessarily get that. But I think, most of when we're looking through what students are generating, I'm not necessarily the one picking what's best or worst. I'm asking them continually what makes this better, what makes it worse. And I think that's the most valuable thing that they can get out of their education. Because ultimately, once they leave the institution and they're on their own, you can create thousands of images all you want. You can create videos that sure might, be captivating. But I think that it requires a certain level of evaluation that I think actually this generation coming up, given the fact that I think this was the first year of college graduates who grew up not knowing what an iPhone was, in the sense that the iPhone came out when they were born. And so I think this new generation is inundated, and they're constantly evaluating and judging and critiquing what they see in digital format. And so I don't think that it's going to be a hard thing to do. I think it's a natural thing that education in the architectural sense has to adapt and be able to find ways to engage a new generation who arguably has more skills in being able to recognize value versus in production versus what we are. But the one other thing that I wanted to mention is that as architects, we've never designed from nothing. We always work through precedent or through references or typologies or through constraints. And I don't think that this discussion about AI means that we're jettisoning all of that. In fact, I think it just makes us more powerful and more versatile designers, being able to sift through the mounts of saved tabs that we have on our computers or the images we've collected over the year. I think the challenge isn't eliminating generation. I think the challenge is making students aware also of the assumptions and the histories and biases and references embedded in what they're generating, because ultimately that just makes them more powerful designers and also able to communicate their designs to clients or to other people much more eloquently.
Yes, I think what I was. I also wanted to ask Alberta in terms of how do you choose and how do you assign these different like data sets that our students are teaching and mixing, like studying and mixing. For example, something about ants, and then like that or the other data sets that are included in that specific projects. Because this is also a way of curating the project itself. Like, how do you choose these different data sets that are like included in the project? Is there, yeah, maybe there's like you assign it, or they select it via like some sort of analysis that this works better with this, or that works better with that, for example.
Well, it's this is a kind of work that works in a parallel way. So, I'm just giving examples, usually about how to train things. And from my background, mainly from my PhD with the cellular automation or things like that, I've been showing them how to program these things in the old-fashioned way first, trying to understand or trying to show them how these systems are actually behaving throughout the traditional coding part. But then they are actually free to select what exactly they want to develop, and the criteria just behind this curatorial process are codified in a way. They are showing us options that then we are helping them to decide. Then the next iteration, they are showing us the possible results, and then we are kind of in narrowing the design part, just all the time, just from something really wide to something more like specific. And actually, we're exploring together. It's something not really fully predetermined. It's something that we are actually co-exploring, which is something that I truly love to do with them.
Yeah, and also a next question: how do you also curate the taste of students, as for example Tucker is saying, or this is about more like learning, finding the efficiency in your projects, like analyzing how the most like efficient way for the projects to emerge?
I think it's kind of both. Yeah, because we need to evaluate two things. Well, as this is a master in which I'm teaching with advanced in architecture, but with this subtitle, performance and interaction. So there's kind of an additional constraint, which is about the idea of interactivity throughout the architectural space or within the architectural space. So that is, in a way, forcing us to just to find few ways of selecting data and which this data is coming from something else that could be human or not. It could be from the space, the architectural space, or it could be from a different space, for instance, the ant ones or the crystal ones, yeah, or even the human behavior also affects. So it's something that is part of that agenda. So it's a kind of the idea of understand that the architects or architecture is just not a building in a static way. It's a dynamic condition, and throughout this dynamic field, we are understanding and we are getting data in different ways. So it's all about that.
Yeah, thank you. I think then I want to ask the question from our list, and it might probably a little bit difficult for Alberto to respond, because this is a question more about how we actually like preserve architectural thinking, in a sense that we have to, like, we're talking about architecture educations, and the people who are graduated will go to work in architecture offices or other like related areas as well. But still, we have some sort of like skills that have to be that students have to gain eventually at the end of their education. So, and we have seen that all our examples that we are showing here are really are super far from the reality, well, from at least like from the reality that like people are building, constructing, producing, even these like interactive pieces. It's still like it's still like developing. It's not in a way. On the, everyone is doing these interactive elements as well. So it's kind of developing and growing. And how do you think we are preserving this architectural thinking? How do you balance between experimentation and actually teaching like architectural stuff, how to think in scale, how to think in spaces, in program, in function, doing models by hands? Like, is this the thing that also what you are concerned about while creating a brief, or just like comes as a flow when you are doing when you teach students, and then you see like, oh, the students are lacking this kind of skill, for example? Like, how do you build this process? Is it completely open for experimentation, or there are also boundaries that you have to meet, like some qualifications the students have to gain eventually?
Tucker or me? Or?
I saw your smile. I think
Both.
you're ready for it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. This is something really funny, yes, because it's something that I've been facing constantly. Because throughout the experimentation process, you can divert to areas that are by far and not precisely connected with architecture. So it's our role as a tutor just to try to keep, in a way or another way, the focus about how to create space, but also trying to keep this kind of open to new ways of exploring architecture in the future. Because in the end, they as a future masters they must use these tools and fields of professional development for their career. So in the end, we cannot prescribe too much about what architecture is. We must keep it in the kind of architectural broader sense, but we cannot force them to just to live completely this kind of speculative agenda all the time. The speculation is part of the architectural development or further development. So in a way, yeah, we are working in architecture in different scales, in different conditions, but in a way, we are always trying to just keep architecture or the architectural design there all the time. And if we detect that they are kind of going be not necessarily beyond, but it's like if they are forgetting a certain point, the idea of what is architecture, we need to just remind, you know what, this is a master in architecture first. So we need to just return a little bit with that agenda. But that doesn't mean that we are just forcing them to leave behind what they're actually researching, because it's something that is really powerful. And yeah, I think that's our responsibility, just to keep them within the architectural field, but in a quite speculative way also.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, well, maybe I just want to start by saying I think that there's this weird myth about the architect, which if an architect is ever in a movie, right, The Matrix, or I was even just showing a friend Zoolander, the Center for Ants. There's this idea that architects are like masters of everything, that they have this ability to almost never fail. Like, and I think that it's a really it's actually a bad thing, I think, to think that all architects need to be generalists in the sense that we need to be able to do everything. And I specifically say that because if you look at a lot of architects who like made waves in the 20th century through publications, through competitions, etc., maybe taking Eisenman as a reference would be helpful. He produced arguably some of the most uh, uh, innovative concepts at the time and was able to shift the paradigm of architecture considerably. But the whole time, his writing, he was using a pen or a ghostwriter who got credit, but it wasn't like he was writing all of those things. He wasn't necessarily particularly good at models. If he had a good intern that day or that year who was really good at models, you would all of a sudden see the office producing these amazing models. But and I'm mentioning that because I think we need to tear down this idea that the architect is just that a project has one architect or that a idea has one mastermind. That I think we need to be a lot more honest in the fact that our skill as architects as a discipline is because we have so much varied knowledge and expertise at our fingertips. I think what maybe a cautionary tale living in the United States would be once upon a time in Los Angeles, we had the biggest metro car network in the world. And then within the course of 20 years, it was all dismantled. And now no one in America knows how to build that infrastructure again, because for the course of 80 years, that knowledge was not passed on. And that to me is a very it's detrimental, and I think it also speaks to the fact that maybe it's the same metaphor of the hand drawing going away and all of a sudden coming back. But I would much prefer, especially when I'm working with students, to not think about necessarily what's the right way to put this? I'd be much more interested in, for instance, in this post-grad program that I'm teaching, a lot of my students don't go into architecture once they graduate. They go into film or they go into fashion. But what's great is when they come back to reviews, they bring so much more knowledge and insight from those fields than you would have been able to get otherwise. And architecture benefits from that. It doesn't not benefit. And so I think the idea of a generalist might be a little outdated, and I think it's okay for us to think a little bit more like we're specialists and that we can collaborate amongst one another and use our skills as opposed to just copying YouTube videos or whatnot, sort of the workflows that we have today. So I'm not necessarily sure if that answered the question entirely, but I think it's really important for us to shift from this idea that we need to have all of the architectural knowledge under our umbrella to be proficient architects. While at the same time, I think we need to take a good look at our discipline and think about what sort of knowledge would be beneficial for us to preserve to pass on to future generations. It would have been great if GM and Ford, who dismantled the red car system, to have archived that knowledge, but of course they did not, and so now we can't build infrastructure in the United States. So I think I'm not sure if there's a direct answer, but I think the more that architects can speak to other fields and learn from other fields and bring it back into architecture, the more architecture benefits from it.
Great, great answer. Alberto, maybe you have something to also add.
Yes. I was just wondering that we are not you are not really generalist. Now we are more expanding the architectural field. It's architecture plus something else that they are actually the student discovering. It's not something that we are forcing them to do. It's something that they are finding their own way, and throughout the projects that we are actually trying to push forward. But it's not about just a traditional building anymore. It's about just to understand that architecture could be developed in different scales, with different methods, with different approaches. We collaborating with someone else, actually understanding that if we are working with the fields that are not precisely part of architecture, but sometimes there is a way of trying to connect architecture with that kind of specific field, and you are actually creating a synergic approach, which in the end is going to be something maybe unique or different. And is maybe that field is going to be the new field for that specific student later. So it's something that we need to understand, that we are not alone. We are not this kind of divine profession that creates everything. No, it's just something to understand that we are necessarily connected with different disciplines, with different approaches, with different ways of thinking, and different ways of making, with different ways of learning. And it's all about to understand which path I must follow throughout this plethora of options.
Yes, thank you. I think I have this the other question, which also related to generalization, but more in a sense of not generalization, generalizing the profession, but more, let's say, the knowledge of how the things can be constructed, for example. I'm just thinking that before, as for example, the case with metro, it was the same with just like all the vernacular construction techniques. Some people would reproduce those techniques because they were giving those like through generations, and now even they are like these kind of techniques are lost. But then we're losing like even this local knowledge that is spread in like countries, for example, because now they get like we train models on them, and we don't even need to know all the standards. Like basically that part of knowing the standards is already gone. We don't need to do that, and don't need to teach that and to study that and learn that. So it's everything in the models. And do you think that this is also something to be concerned about, that is all the vernacular, let's say, ways of doing things? I'm not talking about like huts, building huts. I'm even talking about more like just local knowledge of how things could be constructed in different parts of the world, by people with hands who live there, for example, and not people who come from other countries and use AI to know all the standards and build there. This process was already going on, but I think AI just accelerates how everything is combined in one singular model. How can we create variation out of it? How can we avoid becoming one cosmopolitic kind of architecture?
Yeah, maybe I'll just quickly try. I think it's so fast. This is, I think, the question of our time. This issue of homogenization versus heterogeneity. And I think we're seeing this flux of these tools swaying certain aspects of our society to a very homogenous state, our news cycles, our social media platforms. But in other ways, with these new generative tools, you're seeing like a much more heterogeneous, diverse, I think, output, which is something that I'm really excited about. With that being said, like I think us architects, we could take a little bit of a humble pill, if there's such a thing. But I mentioned that because when we're designing kitchens, we think we're the masterminds of all the kitchens and how we place everything, which we are spatially aware, and that is our job, and we're pretty good at doing it. But when you think about the kitchen itself, the refrigerator was created for meat packing. The microwave was invented during World War II to help Raytheon from military magnetron technology. The dishwasher came from the hospitality industry. The electric stove came from electrical engineering. All of these appliances we're surrounding ourselves with come from outside architecture. And it's been sort of the last century, I guess, figuring out how to integrate these things into architecture, which in many ways has been mediated by code, law. You can't have a certain microwave with a certain voltage because it might catch the house on fire. You need to have certain dampening so that the refrigerator doesn't give off too much moisture or doesn't make things too humid. There's certain architectural responses to these foreign architectural objects that we've had to make. But if you look at the rooms around us, architects right now are mostly pulling from things that are kind of outside of our discipline, or that aren't even designed by architects in and of themselves, but just CAD drawings that we're downloading from Lord knows where they're made. I'm mentioning all that because I think this new era is, we've seen architecture homogenize. Every person has a microwave. There were more TVs in households in the world than refrigerators in the 50s. We're surrounded by these appliances, and I think with these new tools, I'm very fascinating seeing how students can both integrate them into architecture so that it's much more of an architectural project. But at the same time, I don't know, there could be bifurcations where all of a sudden this also enables a weird split where things we take as granted for architecture can become more novel or can become something different. But I think ultimately, I love thinking of that kitchen metaphor because it makes me realize as soon as I step in a kitchen, even that I design, I'm still a guest, and I'm pulling from a lot of different knowledge sources that have accumulated over the year that allows me to do what we're doing. And I think the more varied that is, and the more innovative we can start coming up with solutions that maybe, this might be antithesis to what I was saying earlier, but that we can have in-house conversations about how do we integrate that microwave into the architecture more? Or is there ways that we can integrate these appliances that are ad hoc, add on to all of our homogenized lives to make them more heterogeneous? Not sure how that works, but I think these new generative tools that are coming allow us to do that at a much more rapid pace than we were able to do before.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think also I would love to add something about this strong possibility now just to develop kind of local way of AI process instead of just to be using the generic cloud-based systems that are really available. I know that it's kind of easy to just to access to ChatGPT or to Gemini or to Claude, and you just do something for me. Just I need this image. And then they're going to do something that has been developed using the generic database that is actually using information from who knows where the internet usually, but in the end has been created in a quite specific way with a lot of biases, which is something really complicated. So when I'm going to talk about what I've been actually working with my students when they are actually learning about how to train AI, maybe not with a super mega resolution or with super hyper real approaches, but with their own data. This is something that if you ask me if we have the chance to just to promote the idea of generate our own data sets is something that is going to just to diversify the ways of creating new architecture using AI, using local data, using vernacular data, vernacular materials translations. And in the end, we are in a way going to promote diversity, which is something that we truly need. So because the big risk about AI now is the idea of using information or generic information or information with a lot of biases instead of just using information that has been specifically created by people that truly want to do something different and unique. That's something that if you truly think about the democratization about the use of AI, it's actually based on the possibility to train our own things. And the computer power is a limitation, yes, but year by year is less. I remember a few years ago when I was just trying to train things, my poor computer was just suffering, literally crying. Now, the new computers are coming with a core AI processors, neural engines, and the things are by far better. Maybe in a few years more in the future, the things are going to be even better. So now we are actually trying to just to work with our own AI version. And that is the way, instead of just using just these corporative solutions that are not really, I don't really want to just promote as that is the AI way of doing things.
Yes, thank you. I think I also was thinking about that when we are creating our own models, we actually create so much diversity, and we actually create domains of our own knowledge. Like every architect can create his own domain based on all the data sets that he gathers. Yes, maybe I would proceed to the question about the future from this point. Maybe just one quick question about using text in all the generations, because I think for me at least, maybe not right now, but a little bit earlier, it was a question like, how do we use the language when we are translating our ideas to images, or do, like, for example, do you skip the language part, or do you skip texts in your work, and you avoid like all the pitfalls that language has? Because all the prompts that are used to generate images in like image diffusion models is just a language that we use. And then, for example, architecture needs completely different language to create things that we want to create. How do you deal with that? Do you do you see this as a problem at this point, or this is maybe something that inspires you as well?
Well, yeah, I could continue, and then maybe because with the idea from before, because in a way, no, it's not a limitation. Well, it depends. At the very beginning, they are using kind of a really more generic way of training data, but we just assigning just one single concept as throughout the clip process in order to just train this data set. But then later, I've been trying to encourage them to just to use more words, more concepts, specific words that actually are triggering specific behaviors in the AI generative process later. And I think it's not a limitation; it's just expanding the ways of creating. But it's part of the job. So they need to start with something super simple and then adding complexity in terms of the language. And it's a kind of really interesting opportunity about to actually to link, if you ask me, the theoretical background about how to understand and how to describe an architectural space throughout this training process. And then finally, what you are actually getting is by far more connected with the theoretical approach of architecture than before, which is something that I love, I truly love as a kind of emerging result or unexpected result.
Yeah, I find it fascinating again, like that we're in this turn where now language becomes one of our most powerful tools. That I think 10 years ago people were worried that we're all becoming less literate because we're playing with all this social media. But I think again, it might sound silly, but I think through our phones and through the last 10 years of how we've interacted with the world politically, architecturally, the language is becoming so much more important, and in a weird way, in a like Hegelian way, it's sort of pointing out, I guess, the limitations of what architects can do per the language that we use. With that being said, I actually think that this is our strongest asset as architects. In architecture school, what are you doing 90% of the time? Talking. Sorry. Well, when you yeah, I would actually say maybe half and half. Maybe half of the time you're talking, you're trying to work through your projects with your instructor. You're presenting them in front of an audience. You're putting it into the public arena, and you're finding ways to describe your project, which for many people say architecture speak is nuanced and really complicated and difficult to understand. But I think that that's our strongest asset, because what we're trying to do is appease as many stakeholders as possible. Try to make as many people who are part of the project sit at the table when we're speaking. And so I think prompting tools is actually like perfect for architects, because it's what we do day in and day out already. With that being said, I think bias, what Alberto was saying earlier, is insanely important. I mean, if you look at, I was just reading this article, if you look at certain demographics of people and the hate speech that different chat engines will try to curtail or go around is incredibly biased. Women have a far more high, on any model that you're working with, have a much higher tendency for the machine learning to be aggressive towards or to be critical of. And so while I think we are certainly poised to use these tools because it is our meat, our what's the right metaphor? It's what we do. But I think that it now, and this is sort of why I was talking about evaluation earlier, I think it requires us to speak a little bit more thoughtfully or prompt a little bit more thoughtfully, which I think if you go to the local, or if you go down to the granular and you're not just using the generic, but you're trying to be very specific and you're training your data sets, you can enter into a territory that I think, of course, machine learning is bias. You are training bias into a data set. That is what it is. But I don't think that the world exists without bias. I think bias is what comes with any sort of interaction, psychologically, politically. It is what happens. But I think architects could be very important at in this discussion, because we have a lot of ability to talk about biases in the context that we work in. And so I think it is a very powerful tool for us to start learning how to engage with. And it's also important to know, I always have students who work with me all year. They're like, it took me an entire year of just using these tools every day to figure out how to prompt efficiently, how to get what I need out the other end. So it doesn't mean it's easy. It requires amount of labor that shouldn't be understated. But I think nonetheless, the more that architects can get under the hood and understand these biases and how to talk about them with our audiences, with our clients, the more productive our conversations will be, and thus I think better our urban environments and our architecture will be as well.
Thank you so much for such a long response. And really, like you have so many, like such different opinions coming from such different contexts as well. And I think we don't have so much time left, but I would just proceed to like the last question about future. And also, I think there was one question about future from Artem. I think I will just include it in the question that I already had. So maybe one is, I think we already responded to that if AI will stay an assistant for us and not become an author. I think we already responded to that like quite painfully, that it's so much diversity that it cannot really become an author on its own. We still will need to create so many things. What kind of data we put in, what kind of lens we use to also analyze the results. These are all things that still limit AI to become like a fully authorized form of creating architecture, like architect. So yes, what do you guys see for yourself, like the most exciting things about AI in architecture, and what maybe coming from what you're already doing right now, like what would be super interesting for you to explore, and how do you see this going to like develop in future? The use of AI in any way possible for architecture.
From my perspective, is from AI and fabrication, is something that I truly and still trying to understand, because there is an embedded information within each pixel that is usually being transformed into a voxel, and then from the voxel to the finally a proper geometry to be literally 3D print or cut or slice, you never know. And that translation process from something that is coming from the AI to something basically real, that transition and is so interesting, because you are actually, you need to understand that there is not a direct workflow. You need to divert. You need to explore different ways of translate a pixel into something else. Because usually, or actually, the models are at least the ones that are actually more available for your to be using your own computers are most of the time image based. So as the diffusion models are part of that, and from an image to a 3D model, there is a kind of a super diverse way of trying. If you want to do that, this is like the ways of translating are literally huge. You can actually get deepness. You can, through the deepness, you can actually understand a point into the three-dimensional space. With that point, you can create something else. You can thread the point. You can connect the point with something else. You can triangulate, and so on and so on. And then finally, the result could be, again, reiterated through AI, trying to find, let's say, a structural efficiency. And after that, you can actually try to fabricate, and so on and so on. So, and that way of connection in the workflow and how the AI is actually operating in different dimensions is something that I truly love, and I'm still trying to explore as much as is possible.
Yeah, I love that. I very much agree. I think we're going to see tremendous innovations happening over the next 5 years when it comes to material science, and as we start moving from just generative tools creating nice little objects into really manifesting themselves into architectural spaces and form. I think it's going to be really exciting. I wanted to maybe this will help with how I think about it. In the chat, I just put a little diagram for everybody, in case people don't know who these are. But Lynn Margulis is a biologist who basically undid a lot of what we thought about evolution being a process of internal change. She pointed out that there was an experiment done where a fruit fly got a virus when they were doing an experiment, and they thought, oh no, the experiment is botched. But she said, no, that virus, that foreign body, allowed for the evolution of the fruit fly to occur. And in a similar way, Donna Haraway, who's a cultural writer, commentator, talks about the cyborg, this idea of the human and the artificial coming into one form. Example being our phones being on us 24/7, even our glasses, the technology that we put on ourselves already make us somewhat of a cyborg. And the reason I'm bringing those things up is because I think with AI, it allows us to enter into a different kind of symbiosis, which is much more cognitive, as opposed to just biological or cultural. And that is very fascinating to me. I love it when students are using these tools and almost being like archaeologists and understanding the weird biases that are programmed into certain models. Or they realize if they put in Art Deco, there's always a certain color scheme that's associated. There's a sort of retroactive way that you can use these tools as well to become researchers, to understand how our cognition and how we've programmed different systems, whether they be the internet or the tools we use, have certain proclivities that with AI we might be able to overcome or find weirder symbioses than we're able to at the moment. So that's what excites me the most about this turn, is that I think we're moving away from a lot of external, what would be the right word? I think we're moving towards a time where we can really talk about how we design, how we intellect, how we think about architecture beyond a lot of the crutches that have kept architecture at place. And instead we can have, I think, in my opinion, much more productive conversations like the ones that we had today. So very excited to see what you all do in the future, as well as everybody in this room. I'm sure it's going to be astounding. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think I also, for me, just to like a little bit speculate and kind of wrap up what we were talking about, what I also enjoyed, the idea about diversifying our specialities in architecture, like so much that we can do so many different things. As we also discussed about these like localities and the enormous amount of different models and people regulating those models. So we create like the whole kaleidoscope of different agents. And then it's really fascinating to think how we would communicate, also how we would create collaborations between us. So now, for example, we have collaborations between people who do material study, then who do parametrics, then who do something else. But then we would be able to establish much more varied kind of communications and systems where we would have like 10,000 more different specialities in one group. For example, designing one building, not only landscape designers and architects, but like a whole bunch of different people. Yes, and then also I'm really fascinated about how the natural systems, as we discussed, could be sort of blended with all our artificial world. And this is like the most also like a fascinating topic for me. How do we create much more complexity in what we already have? Yes. And there was like another question. I will try to just make it as a short one. Do you think there is a problem of like models getting closed by all these companies that we won't be able to reach them and work with them? I mean, yeah, like big corporations are closing models from everyone to use. Is this going to be a problem? Is this going to restrict that a limit somehow?
I can say something just quite briefly. Just try to imagine what happened with Claude last time. that's I think is the answer. Just you cannot rely all the time on the big corporations because they are working with the interests that they are coming from third parties that usually are beyond the discipline. Yeah. So yeah, that's my point of view at least.
I totally agree. If anything, I'm more concerned about the fact that every single architect in the world is using one software to design every building. In the sense that I think even though these tools shift from the public domain to the private domain constantly, and it's puts up paywalls in front of you, I promise you, the floodgates have opened to where if there is a opening where people need these tools for much cheaper, it is so easy to develop these tools now compared to before, where if there is ChatGPT decides tomorrow we're $200 and nobody can afford it, I guarantee you an MIT grad is going to create another chat engine that will do what it can do, if not even more at a granular level. So I would be less concerned about that. What I would, if I'm moving into the political arena, I would very much be engaged with figuring out how to talk about AI as a commons, talk about AI as a bed in which everybody has access to it. And unfortunately, those conversations are never going to happen in a corporate meeting room. Those are conversations that we need to have in academia, that we need to have politically, that we need to go out and talk with constituents to try to think about what this new knowledge base, what this new public domain could mean if we allow, if we do not let it turn into just a neo-capitalist hellscape, as we've seen with the digital or with the internet at the moment. So if anything, I would say if we looked at how much political advocacy was happening on the rights of laborers and of workers when the computer came around, we need that times 100. So I would say get involved, try to understand where you can be politically active and think about how you can talk about bringing AI into a commons as opposed to a private discourse. And yeah, I think that's how I'd answer.
Yeah, I want to add something else because it's just moving so fast. Just with the last couple of weeks were really exciting because I've been actually watching on the social media news tons of new developments coming with this idea of keeping your AI models within you with just your own mini training computer instead of just being just connected with the cloud is something that is actually a super interesting milestone because now the companies, for instance, AMD just published just a new mini computer, but it's just based on AI training. So you don't need to be connected to the internet anymore because that machine can handle a proper AI model without problems, which is something that we should go in that direction. Just trying to keep our data safe, trying to just create our own knowledge, trying to just to don't be, let's say, don't be forced to do things that we don't want to do. Just it's something because with the data, it's not our data. We are going to, in one way or another way, we're going to do something that belongs to someone else. And when what I'm saying belongs it's not about just copyright. It's about other things. It's about just to understand that the thing I'm actually creating is my thing, or is a thing that is coming from someone else, and that someone else wants to condition me about what to design, and that is super risky. So that's the shift. Just to keep our data, our information, our everything within us as it must be. This idea of externalize everything in a cloud is something that at the beginning was super interesting, but then when you are actually realizing that all these clouds most of them are belonging to few people, just connected with few ways of thinking, that's super dangerous.
Couldn't agree more.
Yes, I think we have to already finalize the discussion. It was so amazing and fruitful. I'm really thankful for you to join. And yes, I've got so many insights. Do you have anything to say as well? Is there something and then end thoughts?
I just like to say thank you very much. It was really very fruitful and such a clever guys you are. Thank you very much. I guess that we'll share the record and also some summary with you to share it and maybe to think again about some questions. And thank you, thank all of guys who were with us, and who is still with us now. Yeah, it's been a long time, but yeah, thank you very much.
Yes,
Thank
I
you,
think there's
everybody.
gonna be the recording on YouTube, right after that, so we can share that.
Perfect.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So thank you very much. Have a nice day or evening.
Yes,
Whenever
but
you have.
if you
Yeah,
guys
easy.
do want to say something as well, like
Mhm.
how do you feel about the discussion?
I'll just say at the beginning, I think these discussions need to be happening more. If everybody could actually create these sort of symposiums or conversations at their institutions, I think that will do a lot of good, because at the moment, most of these discussions, like I said, are being held in small boardrooms with few people actually making decisions. And I think we're the most educated workforce on the history of this planet. We have the ability to transform it if we have the agency to do so. And so I would just advocate as much as possible. And I think this is exactly what Alberto was saying the whole time, is find ways that you can establish agency wherein you're not being dictated by outside conditions, but you're able to come up with things that are very novel and things that you can use to change the world. So yeah, good luck.
Yeah, in my case, I just firstly thank you for to organize this thing. I can see that most of you are the ones who are actually online connected with us are not English speakers. So I love that, because in a way, all these instances are actually opening the agenda to people that are not truly connected with this way of thinking. And that's why also in my case, I'm also a co-founder of a Digital Future in Spanish. Also, that's why I've been part of CGRADI, part of the organizing conferences around the globe, just trying to just promote and this idea of democratizing the access to the digitalization in a proper way to people that is not allowed to do that because of the language barrier sometimes. So I truly love to, in a way, we need to be disseminating what is behind the AI. Just it's not just about just it's easy. No, it's not just pretty easy. It's just no, it's not about that. I insist it's about just to have the chance to get truly access to this new way of designing in terms of the architectural approach, and also trying to just to understand that knowledge must be collective. It's not about one concentrating everything, and that's what I think I just always try to just to promote.
Yes, that is amazing. That was also my idea to also show and talk to a Russian audience, because this whole events are mainly for Russian audience, but also to connect audiences in a way that yeah, people could communicate and share their ideas. So yes, thank you so much again, and I think that was really amazing. I won't like take more of your time. Thank you so much. I think I will share something more, like some summary or maybe something like outputs of this conversation. I think it was amazing, and maybe we'll have more collaborations later on. Thank you so much again.
Cheers. Take
Thank you
care.
very much. Take care. Bye bye.
Alisa,
Yes.
thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.